thanks for coming in for a chat with me today. I've been thinking about this kind of in the back of my mind for ages, and I've just kind of wanted to, like, I don't know, pick your brain a little bit and see what you've been up to and how it's all going.
No problem. Thank you for having me on. I'm always happy to chat about anything about persona.
Cool. Yeah, it's been, I guess, the more I've moved through my degree, the more I'm, like, figuring out what I kind of am interested in. And now that I'm coming up to the end and I only have, like, 3 weeks left, I'm kind of like, okay, so this is what it's all about. So, yeah, I guess, can you give me, like, an introduction or like a general overview of, like, what your PhD is about?
Sure. So my PhD looks at non-human online persona. In short terms, I'm taking existing persona studies theories and I'm theorizing how a non-human could have an online persona, given that they don't have a self. And typically you need a self to have a persona.
Right. Can you... I understand what you're saying.
Yeah.
Is there any way you can, like, dumb
elaborate?
it down?
Yeah, of course.
Or, like,
I can.
In simple terms.
In simple terms, I am looking at the different ways that we present ourselves online, which is in line with this area called persona studies, which was invented for specifically media and communications contexts. So if you think about the way that you have a Facebook profile and an Instagram page and a LinkedIn, and all of those things are you, but they're different versions of you.
Right.
But you wouldn't say that you had split personalities across. It's still you, it's just fragmented across different platforms. So I'm taking those kinds of theories and looking at how non-human things like animals, fictional characters, and bots, AI, and this whole sort of niche in entertainment media now of virtual performers like VTubers. And I'm looking at how they also have online personas. But it's a bit complicated because with the existing literature, it's very much rooted in the fact that a persona is a representation or a performance of self. So that's the big question that I'm trying to tackle.
So, like, where it all stems from.
Yeah.
All the artificial stuff and the animals and...
Yeah, so I know we're chatting about authenticity today, so it is kind of that question of, does a non-human persona still have an authentic self that they are portraying? But further than that, I'm questioning, do they even need to? Is that element of an authentic self even necessary when it comes to these things?
Yeah. It's interesting to think about. Like, it's definitely some food for thought.
It's very complex.
It sounds very complex and deep. Like, when you say, like, about the social profiles, like LinkedIn, Facebook, Instagram, and you're talking about how the personas, like you said, not split personality, but you've got a different persona on each platform sort of thing. Is that like your LinkedIn would be like your professional persona, your Instagram would be like your, you know, your social life, more like personal life persona, and then Facebook's just kind of that in-between sort of one.
That's exactly right. That is a concept called the Registers of Performance,
right?
Which was proposed by Kim Barber, an Australian scholar as well. And that's what she did in her PhD thesis, looked at how you can have this spectrum of performances that you engage in through your online persona, and they range from professional to public to intimate. So exactly how you just described, your LinkedIn might be your professional self, your Facebook might be your private self where you share some photos of what you did on the weekend, maybe some of your personal thoughts, and your Instagram, I think most of us use that in an intimate way. We tend to share things, particularly maybe on a close friend's story, that you might only share with your inner group of people. But what's interesting is we're doing that through public platforms.
Yeah. So everyone can access them, but they're more like just used in a different way.
Yeah, that's right.
Yeah. It's interesting. I think my Instagram persona is like very silly. It's like silly goofy at this point. It's just like memes. Because I feel like Twitter used to be kind of more, well, at least for me personally, I haven't used Twitter as much as I did in early university when they really needed it for BCM, and it was like, you must do this many tweets per week.
Twitter's as a platform has really collapsed.
Yeah.
So while we would love to keep promoting that for BCM students, we have really stepped back from that. We can't in good conscience tell people to inhabit Twitter these days.
It just seems like a really hostile place to be since like Elon kind of bought it out and like rebranded. I find it interesting though they still call it Twitter even though it's got like not much of the aesthetic.
The essence of what Twitter was, and it has been renamed, but as a society we've just decided to not
adopt
be on board with that.
Fair enough. It's very strange. I'm not a huge fan of the rebrand. What are your side note, what are your thoughts on the Twitter rebrand, I guess?
It was a failed rebrand, I would say that. The promises that Elon made for the rebranding, I don't think that they were realised. And I think that the way in which he catered to brands and advertising dollars over user wants and needs and actually usability of the platform really led to its downfall very quickly.
I kind of think like if it ain't broke, don't fix it.
And it wasn't broke.
He kind of just came in and messed it up. I was just like, okay.
Yeah, well, that's a good point though in terms of online persona, because I think a lot of people had a Twitter where it might have been an alt persona, and like where have they gone now?
Like an alter ego sort of.
Yeah, a lot of people had alt Twitters, like that was the name for them, where you might be anonymous. Or even I've got like a private Instagram, which is where I'm silly goofy.
Yeah.
As opposed to my public one, which is just like my happy snaps and what I'm up to. Because I'm in that interesting scenario where I teach here at the university, so I have to be quite aware of the fact that students will find me.
Yeah, that makes sense. That's fair.
And I have to make sure that the uni and the students find my public posts appropriate. So that's just the world I live in. That's why I have a private Instagram.
Makes sense.
Where I can actually post what I want. But then, like, getting back to your question about authenticity, you can start questioning how authentic is my public Instagram if I'm having to sort of moderate it with these concerns in the back of my mind.
Yeah, I guess that's a good point too, is like keeping in mind your public online presence, I guess. That's a huge thing.
People forget we have a digital footprint.
Yeah.
And it's there forever.
That's true. I think I've been more mindful of that in the past couple months, especially, like I said, coming to the end of my degree and kind of realising, this is what it's all about. And kind of dividing my silly, goofy stuff and keeping that for my, like, close friends story. It's interesting to think about like authenticity in that way. I know a lot of in the past few years there's been a bit more talk about like mental health as well, and this kind of idea that people only post the highlights of their life, I guess. And I guess the whole conversation around mental health is becoming less taboo now, which is good. So people can sort of like open up a bit more about not just the highlights, which is good to see. I'm trying to think of like where my question's headed.
That's okay. I can jump in and maybe offer an academic theory of where that comes from and where this whole idea of how much we share or don't share comes from.
Yeah.
So a lot of persona studies literature comes from Irving Goffman's identity theories. He's a sociologist. And it's this idea that you have a front stage and a backstage. You can think of the backstage as your real, authentic self, and the front stage as your persona or online persona. And Goffman theorized that we actually adapted our front stage according to the social situation we were in and the people that were there and the different power structures and the different expectations of that situation culturally.
Right.
So we actually have always done a similar thing to like maybe sharing something on close friends instead of public. We've done that in an analog way, I guess, like offline.
Yeah.
As like part of how we present ourselves in everyday life. It's just that now that that's become mediatized, so the way that we engage in self-presentation is now through our social media accounts and taking photos of ourselves or things. And it's really interesting watching the ways that that changes with how platforms evolve, but also we now have a generation who from birth have been in that situation of self-presentation, whether it was by proxy of their parents taking a photo of them like the second that they were born.
Mm-hmm.
That's been really interesting watching how comfortable that generation is with sharing things online. If you compare that to like baby boomers, who really don't want to share anything online.
They're quite a little bit more private about this stuff. Yeah.
And like they're just happy to divulge a lot of things, forgetting that we have a digital footprint and it can impact your professional life or personal life. So yeah, online persona is fascinating when you like step back and think about how it's become ingrained in our social interactions and how we present ourselves as individuals. The platform practices are quite fascinating as well, even how Instagram has gone from posting like filtered selfies. Back when I was a teenager, that was very big.
Yeah.
To put like the retro filter.
I think like late primary school is like around when that phase
I think
was
that would
happening
track,
for
yeah.
me. Yeah.
Or like when you would have the white border around your photos for some reason. And then, you know, the white border was out. We don't do that anymore. And then carousels came in. And then photo dumps started happening.
Yeah, when Instagram added the feature where you could put more than one photo per post. Yeah.
But then the purpose of those changed over time. You no longer posted every single time you went somewhere, which was very common when I was a teenager. It was like, okay, I left the house today, so I better do a post. Now it's a curation.
Like a monthly recap.
Yeah, here's my February. This is what I do. Here's 10 photos that represent my February.
Yeah.
And there's an art to it. And there's an unofficial rule that, you know, you should have like a silly one at the end, and you should have, you know, a photo of a landscape in there somewhere, or food or drinks. And
it's got to be a bit diverse.
Yeah.
Diversify your content.
No one sits you down and says, okay, here's the rules now. We observe what other people are doing and we adapt. And that all is what Goffman observed. But now we're just doing that on social media.
Yeah, interesting. Just as you spoke, like so many things came up for me just then. Like I made a few dot points because I wanted to touch back on some of the stuff you said. So the thing with kind of deciding what you share where, so with close friends and then your public profile and such, it's kind of interesting. A term that came to mind for me was masking. Sort of like...
Yeah, that's a great term to use with persona. I mean, the word persona comes from the Greek prosopon masks.
Right.
And
that checks out.
Yeah. And then you've got the other root of the word from Carl Jung's theories about the ego being a mask.
Oh,
so
exactly
mask and persona is like, that goes hand in hand. But interestingly, in my PhD, I'm trying to move past that because that's where the concept of persona as a mask that you put on to represent yourself or perform something comes from, which is a bit complicated when we think about things like a fictional character that doesn't have a self in the first place to then put a mask on and represent themselves.
Yeah, so it's just the core of who they are is their performance, and that's it.
That's exactly right.
There's nothing underneath that.
Yeah, but I'm saying that's okay. We don't have to have the self underneath. That very much comes from Deleuzean philosophy, which is a new edition. Not new. I mean, persona studies draws on it kind of inherently, but without saying it explicitly. So that's what I'm trying to do.
Right, okay. So I guess a lot of this stuff would kind of overlap a little bit with like a lot of psychology.
Yeah, my PhD is very interdisciplinary because it's obviously based in psychology, sociology, and philosophy,
Yeah.
but just how they apply to media and communication. So
yeah.
I do a lot of wide reading for this.
Yeah, I'd guess you'd have to, do a lot of external disciplinary research as well.
Yeah.
Another thing you mentioned was this new generation that have been like, just since they've been born, have just had technology shoved in their faces.
Mm-hmm.
It makes me wonder, I guess, would you consider that like a constant performance? I wonder if, I mean, it's still a bit early to tell maybe, but do you think like there aren't probably enough ethics yet for that younger generation as well?
Yeah, I think it's something that we are starting to see, particularly in the family vlogger context, those conversations about, can a child consent to having a
Yeah.
digital footprint before the age of 18? And it's very much aligned to celebrity studies and thinking about child stars and the appropriateness of having a child star and making money from a public persona. So that's where it all comes from. But at the everyday level, I don't think we will see research about it for a while, because we obviously need to wait until that generation is of an age where it's appropriate to interview them about those things. But you can definitely observe even teenagers and young children who know how to use these technologies, whereas we probably weren't even given something like a phone with a camera until I don't know, I was 13 or 14.
Yeah.
So I've gone my whole childhood without having to maintain an online public self. I can't imagine what it's like being 3 or 4 and knowing how to take a selfie.
Yeah, that's
I know
crazy.
that my cousin's baby, who's 2, fully posted a selfie on her Instagram page, by herself.
What?
She knew how to unlock my cousin's phone, take the selfie, and then open Instagram and post it. And she's 2.
That's hilarious. That's kind of funny. But it's also kind of like, whoa.
Yeah,
It's
right?
interesting. It's interesting to observe these kind of not in that sense, but not that specific example, but these kind of Nepo influencers almost.
Yeah, I get what you mean, because
That
there's
kinda-
going to be a new generation of influencers that are famous because their mum or dad
Yeah.
was an influencer.
Yeah.
And they became famous through the content that was created of them when they were a child. It's an interesting scenario to be working in, and I think it reflects our changed attitudes towards what we consider entertainment media as well. I was saying to my first year class last week, isn't it weird how for entertainment we'll go on a social platform and just watch someone's everyday life?
True.
If you told someone that 20 years ago, they'd probably call you a stalker. Why are you
Yeah.
doing that?
Yeah, that's true, I suppose.
But that's all roped in with, that presentation of self and actually making it publicly available for an audience. That's what online persona is all about. But then those questions of authenticity come in when money's involved.
Yeah, that's true. I guess a lot of branding and advertisements and stuff, it does kind of take away a bit of that authenticity if there's money involved, like you said.
Well, it's hard to know because I'm of the opinion that an online persona doesn't require an authentic self. But if you are of the opinion that an online persona should be an authentic presentation of yourself, you need to think about what's authentic. What does that look like? Does that mean that I have to post every private thought on my LinkedIn page?
Probably not.
Probably not.
Yeah.
That's why I brought it back to Irving Goffman's thing, because we actually do regulate what information we give out and what we keep to ourselves all the time. And that's just part of that public performance of self offline as well. So I think you can still be authentic without posting every single thing that goes through your brain. And the authentic part about it really is the fact that you are choosing to post your close friend's story and then post a work achievement on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
Because we do that in real life anyway.
Yeah, you decide who you tell and people just find out when they find out.
And I don't walk through the campus and just scream my thoughts to everyone. So
Should give that a go. That'd be something different, wouldn't it? That'd be
We could give it a go.
it'd
See
be
how
an
people
interesting,
react.
interesting thing to observe. I
But
think.
I mean, you could equate that to Twitter, right? Like just
Yeah.
putting out your thoughts into the public sphere.
That's true. Yeah, people do tend to do that. I've never really felt the urge to do that on Twitter. I know a lot of people have used it that way to be quite like a personal. Every little thought is out there, and sometimes they're entertaining, but sometimes I'm like, I don't know. I don't know if anyone really needs to know that. But I've never had the urge to post, I guess, in that way. But it's interesting to observe for sure.
Yeah, so I guess what's authentic is different to the individual.
Yeah,
it'd
it's
be
all
authentic
subjective.
for you to not post
Yeah,
that stuff, but it'd be inauthentic for another person maybe to not post it, if you know what I
Yeah,
mean. If
it's like
they have a
it's-
tendency to want to do that.
yeah. I guess what's authentic is like subjective to each person, like you said.
And then where it comes into question, and where it rightly comes into question, is with influencers who are actually
Yeah.
profiting off that persona. So if they're making certain claims about themselves that end up being false, I can see why people would be upset
Yeah,
about that disconnect between, let's say, actual self being their offline self and their performed persona.
Yeah, yeah. It's an interesting thing to think about.